Psalm 38. I find it interesting. You may think that Krista and I sit around all week and strategize on what we're going to do, what I'm going to teach, and what songs we are going to sing in worship. We don't do that. We sometimes will say something to each other, but Krista is not always aware of where I am in the book I'm in because, of course, she's teaching the kids. And I'm not aware of what song she's singing, but I find it interesting that probably about half of the words that we sang in praise this morning are from the Psalms. And several of them you will hear ringing sympathetically, maybe not from the exact psalm that we sang this morning and that we're going to be reading this morning, but some of the very same themes, because there are some very consistent themes throughout the book of Psalms, as I'm sure you have already heard and grasped hold of as we've been walking through the book of Psalms as far as we've gone. And for that reason, we are not necessarily going verse by verse through every psalm, because there are some things that are said over and over again, and there's a theme that runs through them. But I would encourage you, are you having trouble with your prayer life? Do you find it just kind of stuffy, or maybe, I don't know, I've prayed this before, or I don't know what to pray? Here's my suggestion to you. Open up the book of Psalms. And you could take any one of them, or you could start with number 1 and go straight through to number 150. But let a psalm, or more than one psalm, be your prayer. Now, I know that we in Calvary Chapel are not typically used to the idea of, a prayer that's written down and, thought of beforehand. Isn't prayer supposed to be spontaneous? Well, yeah. Yeah, it's supposed to be from your heart. That's the key part of it. Not necessarily it has to be spontaneous, never written down before or something. And so praying from the Psalms can be a wonderful, enriching experience as you are struggling in your prayer life. Just open up the Psalm and pray it unto the Lord as it coming from your own heart. And here's what you'll find, if you haven't realized it already as we've studied the Psalms. David, Asaph, the sons of Korah, Solomon, Moses, the others who wrote the Psalms, they were speaking straight from their heart. And you will find that there are a lot of things that you experience or that you're going through that, gosh, they were going through the same thing and praying about that very same thing. So try it. You will be blessed. I guarantee you. So as we come to Psalm 38, and I'll get there sooner or later. Psalm 38, and the Psalms that we look at this morning, many of them could be considered prayers. Some of them are outright prayers. Some of them can be considered prayers. And we pick it up at verse 38, verse 1. O Lord, do not rebuke me in your wrath, nor chasten me in your hot displeasure. For your arrows pierce me deeply, and your hand presses me down. There's no soundness in my flesh because of your anger, nor any health in my bones because of my sin. For my iniquities have gone over my head like a heavy burden. They are too heavy for me. My wounds are foul and festering because of my foolishness. Now go back to the beginning of that psalm, right before verse 1, and notice who wrote this particular psalm. This is David. This is David. Now, David knew the Lord from a very young man. You remember, as a boy or a young man, he was the one who said, hey, the Lord can be our strength, Israel. I'm willing to stand up in front of this giant guy and fight him with a slingshot because I trust in the Lord my God. So this isn't someone who doesn't know the Lord, who is going through some experiences of extreme difficulty. The rest of the psalm talks about exactly how bad it is. And he's going through it, he says, because of his own foolishness or sin. I'm suffering because of my sin. Lord, do not forsake me. That's his prayer. Hold your finger there in Psalm 38 and turn to the Gospel of John. Gospel of John, chapter 9. Have you ever wondered whether the things that you're going through are judgment for your sins somehow? Or, God's against you? Or maybe you felt that at some time. Well, God's just against me in this. We need to sort through this and understand how sometimes difficulty and even physical infirmity, how that relates to our relationship with God. And the first thing we need to see is from John chapter 9, starting at verse 1. It says, "Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth." Okay, this was not an accident. This man was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, "Rabbi, who sinned, this guy or his parents, that he was born blind?" You see, there was a concept in that day among the Jews, and the disciples held on to that concept that, hey, you're blind, you're lame, you have some physical infirmity. Well, obviously, you've done something wrong, and that's why this has come upon you. So they don't even say, well, did somebody sin so that this guy is like this? They say, who was it that sinned? Was it him, or is this some sin and judgment that he's inherited from his parents? And notice what Jesus says. He says, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him." Now, in the rest of the chapter, what Jesus does is he heals this man who was born blind. And then the guy gets in trouble for it because he's testifying to the fact that he was blind and now he can see. And the Pharisees bring him before the court and they say, well, who was this guy who did this? He goes, I don't know. I was blind. I couldn't see who it was. I don't know who he is. Well, what does he believe? Well, what kind of theory, what kind of theology did he have? And he comes to the place, and I love it. He says, I don't know. You want to know what he believes? Go ask him. All I know is I was blind, and now I see. Sometimes our faith needs to come to that. We get wrapped up in the fact that, well, I don't know about the problem of evil. Why is there evil in the world? What happens if someone comes and asks me that, who's an unbeliever? Why is there evil in the world? I won't know what to tell them. Tell them you were blind and now you see. I can tell you, I was wrapped up in what this world had to offer and headed straight to hell. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. That's where I was going when God got hold of my life. I was blind, but now I see. But you see, in this story, Jesus gives us a truth that, hey, wait a minute. You know what? Not all sickness is due to someone's personal sin. Now, I will say this. All sickness is due to sin. It's due to the fact that sin entered this world. There was no sickness in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were created pure and totally healthy. No colds, no fevers, no flu. It was when sin entered the world that sickness and death came into the world. And as we learned last Wednesday, looking at the last half of the last chapter of the book of Revelation, man, it's going to be good in the new heaven and new earth. No more sickness, no more death, no more sorrow, no more tears. But today we live in a world that's full of sickness and death. And sickness is not necessarily due to a personal sin. We can't make that assumption. Oh, sick? Oh, well then. But turn to 1 Corinthians, a couple chapters to the right, and we find the complementary verses to this so that we get the full understanding. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And Paul is talking to the Corinthian church, which was a wild partying church. And they used to have agape feasts where, unlike what we do on the first of the month where we celebrate communion during the service and then afterward have a meal, they would have a meal beforehand and then have service. And the problem was people were coming from all over and enjoying the feast and getting drunk before church, basically. And Paul has to set them right and says, look, you're considering the communion of the Lord. You're considering the Lord's table. You don't understand it.